But I'll call you later any old way, FYI.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, is there a handout today? Mr. Chairman, is there a handout today? I appear to be not coming through.
You're coming through. You might not be by the mic though.
Okay. I want them to send us the email if there's a handout. Can you see they're handing something out in the boardroom?
Bonus checks.
Doesn't sound like they can hear us.
Yeah, not yet.
Morning, Chris.
Good morning. There she goes. She's punching something over there. Good morning.
Morning, Chris. Morning, Myrna.
Hi.
Should we go around the room? Hi, Jared. Oh, he's not paying attention. He's not gonna be on here.
My first time, I guess. The time being 9:02 a.m. on Wednesday, August 31st, 2022. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Kane County's American Rescue Plan Committee. Clerk, please call the roll.
Bates,
Bates here.
Brown,
Brown's here.
Froz, Gums,
Gums here.
Kenyon,
Kenyon here.
Leonard,
Leonard here.
Martin,
Martin present.
Molina,
Molina present.
Strothman, Tepe,
Deppie here.
and Sanchez.
Sanchez present. If someone could please ask for unanimous consent to approve the minutes of August 3rd, 2022.
So moved.
Tepe moves.
Gums-
Well, Tepe
Gums will second.
makes the motion. We don't need a second, actually, just
Oh,
no
yeah.
objection. The minutes are approved. Public comments. Is there anyone here or online that would wish to deliver a public comment at this time? I don't see any names I don't recognize online, so we will move on.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question, please. Bates.
Ms. Bates, you'd like to deliver a public comment? Go ahead.
It's a public question. Is there a handout in the boardroom and could we receive that in email?
A lot of them.
I think everything that is printed here is in the email, in the agenda packet.
Okay, thank you.
So there's nothing that is printed here that you don't have available online.
Okay, thank you. In the packet. Thank you.
All right, we have a few discussion items today before we get to our resolutions. First being program manager update. Mr. Phillips.
Good morning. I'm Peter Phillips, the American Rescue Plan Program Manager, and the agenda mentions that we would talk about the Community Support Grant Dashboard first, but we're going to briefly go over the ARPA budget. So if you would bring your attention to that page, if
You need me to pull it up? Yeah.
yeah, we're going to pull that up on the screen here. The budget summary page.
1 second, bear with me.
It should, actually, I think the worksheet.
Is that,
Not there.
oh, no, it's not on there.
All right. One more down. I'm sorry. Excuse me. FY23 budget. Correct. I'm sorry about that. Thank you. So as you see, we don't have much. One more page down in that same document. There we are. I'm sorry about that. So we have the details on the right, set with the Assistant Executive Director of Finance. We do not have changes over the 22 amended budget line on the at the far left, but for the fact that we made an adjustment to Jenny Smith's employment status, and we made an adjustment and removed her from a contract, the contract line, to a permanent part-time employee. So she is added to the benefits, and on Jenny, nothing personal, but our head count is 1.5. So Jenny is she is 20-hour-a-week individual, so that is half. So you see that noted on the right-hand side of the head count. And then there's another mention regarding temporary change to part-time staff, and that those are related. And the non-payroll expense, essentially the large number is the transfers out that you'll see toward the bottom, and that represents revenue recoupment, mass fact site, and those previously approved transfers out that the committee and the board approved.
Peter?
Mr. On, excuse me, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Would you go over that one more time a little slower, please? The part
Yes.
about the,
So the transfers out ties to the detail page further back in the summary from that is in the packet. So that 17 million, excuse me.
Yeah,
So the
17.9.
transfers out of 17 million,
yeah,
961,893 is a combination of the detailed summary budget page from the finance department, and it details the revenue recoupment that was approved, the mass back site, contact tracing contract with KPMG, and
Okay.
those other detailed items in the much more detailed budget page that we provided in the packet.
okay, thanks. I
So
just-
those were all
one more time.
approved by resolution.
Thank you.
Okay. Excuse me. So returning back, so the fund 355, which is ARPA, is the 2023 projected funding is very similar in the amount to the 2022 that we carried. The remainder of the balances maintained by Mr. Kilmore in the Treasury Department, and he is facilitating that. But Mr. Onzik identified the 25,472,309 as an appropriate amount to have in the fund for projected resolutions that you may be addressing here in the next several months. Does anybody have any questions regarding this? Yes, sir.
You saying we only have 25 million left to allocate?
No, the 25 million that we have transferred that is not maintained by the Treasury Department. So we have allotted in 2022, essentially the expenditures and the budget amount was at the 25,457.
So how much do we have left?
We have, I don't know the exact number, Mr.
Just
Tepe,
rough.
but yes, roughly we have just about 63 million left, not authorized to distribute by resolution.
Okay, so we've yet to approve those requests that we call the internal requests.
Yes, sir.
Okay, but they remain on the list, right?
Correct.
41 million too, isn't it?
Yes,
Of the 6.
correct. So
We have 19 million left if we allocate everything that we plan on. for the-
Mike, please. Mike,
Yes, with respect to that 63 million that Peter's talking about, 41 million of that are the departmental allocations, which we haven't totally agreed upon yet. But if we do those, we'll have, approximately 22 million.
thank you. That is an
That's-
accurate summary.
That's what I thought. I couldn't understand why this number.
Yes, and this number here that's held for the projected FY 23 is maintained in account 355 by finance. So this has not been distributed. This is on hand. The remaining balance
Is also
is
on
maintained
hand.
by the treasurer.
A simple way to put it is,
Allocated but not distributed.
yeah.
Thank you.
And another way to think about it, this is just a budget and it's an estimate of how much we might need in a certain period of time. If we need more, we make a budget adjustment. This isn't the actual total that we have left. So
So Shepro has a question then.
go ahead, Shipro.
So if we have 63 million left, and if we did approve all 41 million of internal requests, then we would only have 22 million left, and that would be inclusive of the 25 million that's been transferred.
I think so.
Okay.
Mr. Martin?
No, not that.
I want to clarify for my purposes, the internal requests. We haven't, my understanding is that we have approved the list pending Ernst and Young and the state's attorney signing off on what they've done.
Mhm.
And that is a resolved issue at this point in time. Is that correct?
Each project will require a resolution when they're prepared.
But for the technicality of the resolution,
Mhm.
we have
In
already
spirit.
approved, we've approved those, well, not in spirit, we've approved them. I just want to confirm that
We have,
that I know that we're dealing with a lock here, that we have approved those expenditures, and if they pass Ernst and Young and the state's attorney, those issues are behind us. Is that correct?
Well, yes and no. It could be the will of the committee to deny a project at this point. What we did pass was the spending plan resolution, which is more or less, I wouldn't say commitment, but is a statement of our intention to approve all of those projects pending the review, thumbs up review from our consultant in the state's attorney's office. But again,
Well, how's that
each one
different?
will have to have a resolution like the one we have today and get
Right, but
approved.
I don't mean to keep hammering the nail below the surface.
It's
of
all
the
right. And I
board.
might not be understanding your question correctly either. So,
Well, we have approved a list of inside expenses from county departments and elected officials. The only condition to that money being spent is that Ernst and Young confirm and the state's attorney confirm that it's in compliance with the act, and that we go through the formality of and that the numbers be refined,
Mhm.
but that we go through the formality of the resolution. But that list has been, I just want to know, is that list that is that the list that we've agreed upon? That's what I want to know.
yes, that is.
Okay.
Mr. Brown?
Brown speaking. There was over $3 million in there for contact tracing, correct? And I can't read it. I didn't bring my glasses. I looked at it at home the other day, but I forget how much of that's been used. And are we expecting to use all of the $3 million?
I don't know if we're expecting to use it all. He can answer the numbers, but I don't think that we will expend that total amount.
So what
that would go back into.
It'll
the
go
main
back into the bucket again.
Yeah.
To be distributed
The main
however we choose to.
Bucket. Mhm.
Okay. And then I apologize, but time goes on and I forget things. Contract or contractual expense, $5,373,000. What all does that include? Because I know we've got Ernst and Young, but other than that,
That includes the KPMG contact tracing contract.
Isn't that
does.
also, excuse me, Mr. Chairman, isn't that also external grants that we've
It
distributed?
does include the external grants distributed. And we're at the timing of this meeting is that we're at the end of the month, so we're about to reconcile these numbers. So Friday, these numbers will be updated, but I think we will add that detail so we can more easily identify that. And to Mr. Tepe's point, as well, we'll identify the monies controlled by Treasury that they maintain at this
Mr.
time, to
Chairman?
give you the overall
can I
picture.
finish my question first?
Yes,
Mr.
Mr.
Chair?
Brown, go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, I just want to make sure I'm clear, this contractual expense, what do you mean that includes the external grants?
The external grants are supported by a grant agreement, which in effect is, unless I am corrected by State Attorney's Office, we are treating as contracts.
The community support grant
What's
program.
being treated, but you're talking about the money we've handed out to the big six.
Yes.
Mhm.
So we're considering that to be contractual expense.
Well, I hesitate to really define that exactly as the finance department is, but that is how they are grouping this as a line item. So this is a snapshot of the movement of the monies as it is approved and moved from one account line item to another.
So
And
would we
distributed.
expect then that every time we issue a check to an outside agency, that's going to be accounted for under the contractual expense line item?
That is my understanding. I'll get that clarified for you.
Thank you.
Ms.
Can,
Following up with Mr. Brown's point, has that money been allocated and is out of the 25 million? So we allocated so much money to the 6 mental health agencies for the ability for them to have competitive wages for their people.
That
They are filing for that, what, probably every quarter? So is that money set aside?
yes.
yes, it was transferred and set aside. Yes.
Madam Chair.
I was just wondering, just for clarity,
Mike, please.
my apologies, there we go. Just for clarity for this, contractual expenses are fine if that's where everyone agrees that this money should go, but could you budget detail it out a little bit so you could just put down grant allocation? It can still be total under contractual expenses, but just so we know, to everybody's point, that we know going forward, we've spent this much money on grants, this much money for KGB, whoever it may be. So we see the detail of money that has been allocated and money that's been expended.
We'll expand on that.
And
Yes.
Madam Chair, I'd just like to clarify, we spend money on KPMG, not KGB.
Thank you.
Just very important to distinguish.
Thank you, Mr.
I don't want
Chairman.
anybody in the public getting the wrong idea. Mr. Leonard.
I'm still on my first cup of coffee, so forgive me.
Mr. Chairman, what I think we as a committee need to define and understand is the difference between allocation and distribution. We've allocated funds to different areas. What we've distributed, in other words, paid out, is a whole different area. So this area here in the summary that talks about contractual expense, I think maybe what Mr. Brown was asking, and we don't really have an answer to, I understand that, is these are not just allocated, but also include of the allocation, the ones that have been distributed. Is that correct?
That is correct.
All right.
No, I was, again, Brown speaking. I was just confused because to me, contractual expense is something like Ernst and Young.
Services.
A grant,
Yeah.
money distributed through an app to an applicant is not contractual expense, in my way of thinking.
I agree.
But if that's the line item it's going in, because that's where finance thinks it ought to go, as long as we know that.
Yes, this was
that's-
developed in accordance with finance's methods for all of the other departments. So
Mr. Chair.
I think we do have another document that does need to get updated showing all of our expenses and which categories belong to what. So go ahead, Mr. Leonard.
Mr. Chairman, what I'd like to ask is if we could have a one-page summary, very similar to this, with the definition of the total amount of the monies we received, what has been distributed, in other words, paid out,
Or committed?
what is allocated,
Okay.
and what's remaining.
Yeah.
If we could have that, that would be great.
Yeah,
because-
that's the document I was just referring to. It just needs to get updated.
Because as Mr. Brown had mentioned, with respect to the contact tracing, some of it has been used, but not all of it.
Right.
So we really need that definition on what's been distributed or paid out, what is still allocated or not reassigned, so that we have a better idea where we're at.
You got a snapshot of everything.
Yeah.
All at once.
And it can be a
Absolutely.
one-page deal.
Yeah, for sure.
Mr. Chair, one more question on the contact tracing. I know we passed a resolution for that amount of money to be used, but how long can that lay there? what's the sunset period on that? Does it go on for a
The end
year,
of
2 years, 5 years?
2026.
I'm
So
sorry.
if we don't use the money and we don't reallocate it in some way, it can be used up until 2026 because it has.
No,
been
no, I'm saying
allocated.
up for contact tracing.
Oh.
So was that the amount they were, I believe, if I remember right, that was the amount they were asking for that year, this year.
Oh, right, the contract, like, I
So-
don't have the question or the answer to that question off the top of my head. But I would assume like other similar contracts, if the year is up, the money's still, there's still money there, then a new contract would be renewed.
Right, but we've committed this $3 million
Yeah,
for contact
Uh-huh.
tracing. Okay, but at some point in time, if that money isn't used, that we need to know we've got that money available.
Mhm.
What is that point in time? How long is that resolution good for? Was it the 1 year? I believe it was 1 year that they were asking for that $3 million for 1 year
Mhm.
of contact tracing. So if it isn't used by, say, if it's the 1 year, 12/31, does that money then, it would then come back to us? And if they need more for contact tracing, they'd have to request additional resolution.
That would be a state's attorney question. I could say yes, but I don't know if that would be the correct answer.
Shepro, comment. I
Mr.
think
Shepro.
that Mr. Brown, I think raises a very good point that I think we would all like to know the answer to that. And particularly in that case, but I think it'll apply to other situations as well to know if in fact it continues or if it has a finite time period after which it goes back into the pot.
Yeah, and
So
I think
maybe
no one knows
follow
how
up.
long we'll be required to do contact tracing. And I know
Well-
I've spoken with the health department, and once we're not required, we won't be doing it. So if we have to do it into 2023, then that resolution would have to be, that money would have to be reapplied to that cause.
As I recall, the contract tracing is something the health department does every year. Continuously, because
do,
they
but-
have little diseases that pop up and they have to make phone calls.
Yes.
But that isn't a part of what this $3.9 million.
This
This
is applied to-
$3.9 was specifically for COVID contact
Right.
tracing.
That's right. Only COVID contact tracing. It has
Right.
nothing to do with measles or polio or anything
Right.
like that.
So I think
Because-
maybe Steve standing up at the podium has got the answer for us here, but
Well, I can Stephen Ford from the state's attorney's office. I can certainly, give you a more definitive answer and follow up with you. But my understanding is there was a resolution passed last year, which specified an extension of the contact tracing contract up to November 30th, 2022.
there's the
So
answer.
there, without looking at the specific language of the contract, I can't give you a definitive answer, but that resolution contained language.
So there's the answer. Whatever money is spent up until November 30th of 2022 is spent. The rest comes back to us for reconsideration.
Yeah, but if we need to continue
Subject
contact tracing, it
to-
would go to that. Yeah.
And I can, we can follow up with a definitive answer in writing as to your specific question about what happens to that money after looking at that contract extension in the contract itself.
Any other questions? Okay. Peter, are you? Did your presentation on
Yes,
the budget?
so if there are no further questions on the budget summary, I would lead into the dashboard presentation, which dashboard, I will explain briefly. Ernst & Young, Gary Burke is going to take us, excuse me, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, my apologies. I do have one more question regarding the budget summary. Some of the admin expenses, your compensation, et cetera, Ernst & Young's contract is going to be going on for a period of time. And we have budgeted those resources out of this allocation, out of the ARP, the total ARP fund. Can we see when you do this next time, just add another line of what already has been budgeted for till 26? So we have an idea, we know what you're going to be getting, et cetera. And then how much has been expended? Very similar to what we were just talking about with the contractual. And the contact tracing. It says here that we allocated $3.7 million approximately for contact tracing. About little under 500,000 has been expended in 11. So that's the drawdown. So we got 3.2 left. Whatever is going to be coming out of this year when books are finished for 2022, then we will know where the money is being allocated and how much money is left. So as we go further and we start budgeting, as we get further down, we're pretty aware of what money has been promised and what money is available. Because with our budget right now, every penny counts.
Yes, ma'am. And to that point, that is the run rate that I had briefly mentioned to you, I think 2 weeks ago when you and I and State's Attorney had met, that's forthcoming, that is the step that we're going to create the run rate. And so we'll have that readily available
it
for you,
should
but we
pretty
will
easy.
include it on the next summary. But some of these questions that people are asking for this is information we'll gather and the distributed allocated remaining, those bullet points, we'll do that work now and we'll submit that and distribute to the committee in the next week or so.
Mr. Martin?
I don't mean to overthink it or over talk about it. We do a lot of that. But it's important because we make all these decisions at a point in time, forgetting the budget and anything else. And what we would agree was a valid expenditure the day we voted on that may not be the same thing that we would look at a year later when we're sitting and looking at a series of priorities. So I think we have to know what's been spent, because to some degree and contract tracing is a great example. We based it upon an estimate of necessity. And I'm sure that has application to other things that we're spending money on. And we need to know so that we can, if this wheel has to be reinvented, we can do it every year with some real knowledge in hand.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
You just need a bigger spreadsheet.
Yeah, that's the thing here is this is just the normal budget table that most departments have been using. Some have tweaked it slightly, but yeah, I forgot what the title of it is called, but the master spreadsheet we have of all of our expenses we've seen before and we'll get updated, and it has, I think, all of this information that we're looking for. And if not, we'll add it. And that will be the more important one-page document.
Yeah,
But,
it is in the backup that finance provided that was with the summary page in the budget. We'll simplify that and make it more understandable and more obvious as well. So I would then transition to the presentation of the new dashboard we developed, and the dashboard that you are going to see that Gary Burke is going to walk you through here in a moment. I think Gary is going to share his screen here, but the dashboard was developed. We have understood that we need to explain better what some of the time is spent on and some of the tasks. And this dashboard is related specifically to the community support grant, but the similar dashboard is, if not exactly the same, but we will develop it for the departmental requests. And so you'll see these data points. And it is a lot to take in, but I am available. I'm up in room 406 on the 4th floor here. I'm happy to sit down with individuals or groups of 2 to discuss this and go over this chart. But this is something we are going to distribute on a weekly basis, likely late on Fridays after the end of the day, where we can update this data. So at this point, I'll turn this over. Ernst & Young developed this. This is something that the group had some group thought on this, but Ernst & Young has fleshed this out. And I think it's 2 pages of really good documentation and data points to track this program, but the other programs that the county would decide to run with this American Rescue Plan. So I'll turn it over to Gary Burke right now.
I'm sorry,
Excuse me.
where is this document?
This is a brand new document. We did not distribute it because we want to discuss it and walk through the document 1st. So it'll be distributed for the first time this Friday.
Well, I'm not going to be able to discuss it or understand it from this perspective.
Yeah, Gary, can you zoom in? Maybe so we can see just one table or one section at a time? Por favor, thank you. I'll send that out to you guys.
Mr. Chairman, how's that look on your end?
Yeah, that's better. Is that better for you guys? Maybe a little bit more?
Yep.
Is there any reason this can't be emailed to us?
Yeah, it'll get emailed to you right now.
That's good. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Gary.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Phillips. So one of the things that we do for the county is track all the activity related to the Community Support Grant Program. We leverage the technology in Submittable as the primary communication vehicle with the grantees. It stems back all the way to the applications, and now that they're grantees, all the communication about the expenses they submitted, where they are in the process, and the notification of payment of those expenses. So the first section within the dashboard is meant to be just overall program metrics. So this is the top section is pretty static, which is the number of grantees by tranche. So recall mental health 1 was tranche 1, and the mental health 2 food pantries and shelters represent tranche 2 of the program. So in total is 46 grantees, $4 million has been approved, and the average grant amount is almost $87,000, with the largest being mental health 1. The next part of this section is meant to represent where we are today in the processing of those grants. Recall that the program is a expense reimbursement program. So the board approved the amount of the grant, and in order for the grantees to receive funds from the county, they have to furnish eligible expenses. We review those expenses, work with Peter, and then it goes through a process by which they get paid. So the amount of expenses that have been submitted to date is roughly 1.145 million, which represents about 30% of the overall program. Of that amount, we've distributed roughly 10% or $398,000 of the $4 million total grant. And the remaining is just 2.854 million of the grants. As I move to table 2, section 2.
Excuse me.
Mr. Chippy, yeah, we'll take this one section at a time, I think, Gary, because people may have questions
Yeah.
before you move on.
Sounds good.
Okay, I'm looking at this so that there was $2 million for mental health in your first column. And there's still $1.836 million left, because they have to provide you with details. And my understanding is that they have to provide you with details from their payroll systems. Does that in detail include copies of the checks that they distribute?
At this point in time, we do not require the checks they distribute. Just their internal records is what we use to determine eligibility of their expenses.
Okay, so how long does it take from the time they provide you with the detail for us to release those funds?
That's in section 5 of this dashboard. I'll explain in detail, but to answer your question.
I'll hold up my question.
Okay. Any other questions on section 1 before I move to section 2?
Nope.
Thank you. Section 2 is a summary of the key program dates. And what this is intended to do is provide a snapshot of where we've been, but also where we are and where we're going from a date perspective. So without going through all these dates that you can see on your screens, we published the notice of funding availability on December 20th, 2021. We opened the portal for applications on December 21st, 2021. We sent notifications of those that won in February for tranche 1, and then in mid-March for tranche 2. And I think most important on this list to me is the expense submission beginning date. So that's when the providers received notification that they could submit expenses to us for consideration. So they received that notification on April 25th for mental health 1, and for the others, they received that notification on April 27, 2022. And they have until the end of March 2024 to submit expenses to us for consideration. So as Peter mentioned, we update this on a weekly basis on Fridays. So this is as of last Friday. At that point in time, they had been roughly 128 days or 126 days since they received notification to last Friday, which is the amount of time they could have submitted expenses. And as of last Friday, they still had 578 days to submit expenses.
Any questions on section 2? Mr. Leonard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With respect to the key program dates, I understand that. I think it's spelled out very clearly. In other words, these grant recipients have approximately 2 years to submit their expenses. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Excuse me, this is Peter Phillips. I'd like to go back to one point in chart 2, referring to question Mr. Tepe had regarding checks. There are actually instances where some organizations, depending upon how robust their internal tracking system is in their banking, whereby we have and will require actual copies of individual checks. For instance, we have one Big Six awardee we were discussing yesterday that has some 422 checks, payments of $250 that we need copies of the checks to tie those out. And that's a treasury requirement. So, how it varies is whether or not the organization is distributing their own payroll or if they're using a third-party payroll system. The treasury is requiring a trace of the custody of the monies, if it were. So essentially, these organizations are preparing a large tax return to prove out their receipts, and those are being evaluated. But some of them do involve submitting individual checks for each of the bonuses.
Personally, Tepe here, I think that's crazy. $250 check that's got to go through an audit requirement is a consultant's dream.
Who we dealing with?
So is that your implication that we shouldn't have to do that?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, maybe we can get some response from our legal team on that and give you guys a more definitive answer. Because if we're not required to do that, obviously, why would we?
Stephen Ford from the State's Attorney's Office. One thing to note is that with this program, when the county is giving this money out, as Mr. Burke noted, it is based off a reimbursement model, and the county is under the federal regulations in the statute responsible for ensuring that all money that we distribute is used in accordance with the program. So the contracts contain specific parameters for how the funds are used. And again, we are responsible, or we as in the county are responsible that if funds aren't used in line with the ARPA program, the federal regulations, the county would potentially be looking at a situation where the federal government might have some questions. So I think that explains part of the process that the consultant has set up to ensure that every dollar that goes out is properly accounted for and used in line with the ARPA program.
Oh, yes, it sounds like we're spending about $300 to distribute a $250 check. That's the kind of thing that I think is crazy.
Well, if you don't like that answer, if you like, we could request a more thorough statement from Ms. Michelle Neerman, if you'd like, Mr. Tepe. Would that be required at this point in time?
This makes no logical sense to me, and I don't think I'm alone.
Shepro, comment?
Mr. Shepro?
I agree with Vern. I understand the state's attorney's answer about our legal liability and obligation, but I don't think that really addresses the question of what is the process and the cost of ascertaining that $250 was properly spent in accordance with the conditions of the grant from the government. I mean, that does sound like a a way to spend $300 to assure us that the $250 was well spent. So I would encourage some further explanation of how we implement that obligation and what is the cost ratio of the audit and verification process to the amount of the grant.
If the cost of such expenditures are a number that the committee doesn't like, what would their recommendation be? That we deny the advice of the state's attorney's office? Is that what I'm hearing?
No, not in my case, no. I think, but it might involve our reevaluating some of the specifics of the grant if it's going to get us involved in a verification process that's not cost effective.
How many of these,
Madam Chair.
the bonuses that have gone out, are they all been distributed?
No.
There's more coming? More
As far as
retention
expenses
bonuses?
submitted, you mean?
No, the not-for-profits with the retention bonus of $250 per check per individual. Have they all been distributed? I mean, is it done or are there going to be more coming?
They're still submitting their expenses to us as they go.
So those $250 allocations are continuing.
Yes.
That's correct.
I know, I understand that. My only hesitation is that that train has already left the track. And to pull it back and to reevaluate it may cost more than just encouraging them to do it quickly and to get the allocations of $250. And it's up to their jurisdiction. They know their team, but this was a cost I think we all recognize going into it. And it's a cost I think we're going to have to just swallow. But going forward, any other allocations that go out to any not-for-profits, we can make sure that our admin costs are low and not to exceed the management of the actual grant.
Mr. Chair,
Mr. Brown?
I certainly understand what everybody's saying. So I'm going to say a couple of things. I think it's a whole lot more than $300, but yet it's all a part of a larger picture because the agency may be applying for $10,000 worth of reimbursements and have many receipts in there, checks, what have you, of $250, $75, $4,000. So all that is having to be looked at as a package by the state's attorney and Ernst & Young. When you try to break it down to each individual item that they're applying for, it sounds outrageous. And I agree, but it's a bigger picture in my way of thinking.
Yeah, I think the notion that a $250 check requires $300 of work is just a number that is fictitious and we don't actually know that. And as long as we're following the requirements dictated to us by our legal team and our consultants, well, primarily our legal team, because they tell us what we definitely have to do and what we definitely shouldn't. The costs are going to be what they are. And that is unfortunate that some of the big six organizations may find the requirements inhibitive. But if that is what we're seeing on our end is going to be required to legally cover us in any event of an audit, then I think that's just us being fiscally responsible with the money that we're entrusted with. Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand what you're saying. I think maybe what we as a committee have to do going forward is try to get a definition of what the administrative costs are going to be on grants. And I think Ernst & Young can probably help us with that because there are situations where we're going to be spending 50% or 100% of what the grant money is to reconcile it. And I think we need to have a better direction from Ernst & Young on whether or not it's feasible to give out a $10,000 grant if we're going to spend $5,000 in administrative costs. So I think we need better direction as a committee on different grants that we give and the administrative expenses associated with it.
Well, Mr. Burke is listening, so I think he understands what we're looking for. We would like to see maybe an updated estimate of the costs per applicant. Is that a way to put it?
Well,
Mr. Chairman,
maybe-
Shepro?
Hold on, Mr. Shepro.
I think that's a good part of it. I think the problem is we need to have an idea if we're going to give out a $10,000 grant, if it can be any amount broken up over 50 checks or 10 checks or whatever, what the administrative cost is going to be to process those checks. So, I think Ernst & Young can probably give us a little bit better idea on that, because I don't want to give $10,000 out when we're going to have $5,000 in administrative expenses.
I understand. And of course, we want to spend the money, as thriftily as possible. So I think Ernst & Young will provide us with that information. But if it comes back that we are required to do all of the things that we're doing, and that it costs $5,000 to give out a $10,000 check, we're contractually obligated with these entities. So there's no way that we can back out.
Yeah, and I'm just talking about going forward. If we
For
do
future
any more
programs.
outside external grants, we need to know how that's broken down and an idea of what the administrative cost would be.
Yeah, and going into this, we did have an estimate of the costs per applicant. So that's just something that now that we have real world data, we can update that with the actual experience that we've had.
Thank you.
Yeah. Mr. Shepro, you had a question?
Yeah, or comment. First, I think all of the comments that have been made are very germane. I mean, they all have a point to them. I agree with Mr. Brown's comment that you have to look at the big picture. But it seems to me that what the committee needs is not just being told what the statute or the regulation says, or even the estimate of what the cost is, but an explanation of what the process is. Because the requirement is that we are responsible for the way the money is spent, but nobody is telling us, I mean, the government is not telling us what level of comfort or examination we need to have for us to feel comfortable with what's been done. And so I think an explanation of what the process is and what is involved is really what everybody seems to be coming to as to what information we need to get. Because even the comment, the train has left the station on some of the grants, we still have the obligation and possibly the discretion as to what level of detail that we are going to have. And I mean, this is just a crazy example, but on the $250, what process, or even if it's $250,000 is involved? I mean, do we send somebody out to interview and make sure what they spent the $250 for, that they really cashed the check? I mean, it's like the annual audit that's performed. I mean, you could do almost everything, but what is it that is, if you would maybe call it best practices? Obviously, the auditors that audit our county, they don't look at every single transaction because then it would cost more than the budget. But they do have a formula, a practice, obligations, and maybe if we understood that, we would all have a greater comfort level with what's going on.
Yeah,
Mr.
and we'll,
Chairman,
I think
wait,
if
please.
it needs, hold on, Ms. Bates, I think if it needs updating, then it will be updated, but otherwise we have distributed previously the entire workflow for these types of expenditures, for the grant program. So we'll resend that out and then supply some of this other information that I know everybody wants to see. So Ms. Bates, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to agree with Mr. Shepro. I believe that we're going at way too, painting with too fine a brush when it comes to trying to understand every penny that's been spent. You know, we have to live up to our obligation, but then let our organizations, our receiving organizations handle this. They'll be audited if, on their end. So let's get out of the weeds.
Mr. Martin?
I have an increasingly failing recollection of the tax, of what you do with income tax or anything else, but is there any concept akin to some kind of a letter ruling or a procedural approval from the feds where we could suggest a course of action that we think makes economic sense and have them approve it in advance and gain any protection and from secondary screening later on? I mean, that would be one, in my naivete, one letter to them saying, this is what we want to do. Do you approve this as our method of proceeding? And if we could provide an expedited manner of review and they approved it, are we home free? Or
Then I don't know if that's a legal question or if Mr. Burke, you would have
I just don't want to run scared. If there's I don't want to run scared from all the regulations. If there's a way to shortcut it, say, this is what we want to do, is it okay?
I do know from our own experience, it's very difficult to hear back from the Treasury, but Mr. Burke, do you have any response to that off the top of your head, at least?
Yeah, on that particular point, I would yield to the state's attorneys, but recall that the requirements for this Treasury program are based on federal guidance that supersedes Treasury. And so it may not be just a letter to Treasury, it may be a letter to the OMB about the specific cost principles included in 2 CFR 200.
Okay, Mr. Ford.
Stephen Ford, State Attorney's Office, and just in line with what Mr. Burke said, when we're dealing with this award, we're not just dealing with the ARPA statute, the final rule, which are the rules adopted by the Treasury Department to implement the statute, but we are dealing with that 2 CFR 200, the uniform guidance for all federal awards. So, to the extent that ASA Coyle and I can work with Ernst & Young to provide more information as to compliance with the community support grant program and all, those pertinent federal rules, that's something that we can provide the committee. We'd be happy to.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just to follow
Mr.
up.
Brown.
Brown speaking. I just want to address Mavis's comments about letting the agencies that we distribute the money to share some of the burden through their audits. It's my understanding that it is our burden and only our burden as the county to ensure that the money is distributed per the guidelines of the Treasury Department. It's not up to the applicant. The applicant can apply for anything they want to apply for. We have to determine whether or not it meets the guidelines. And if we distribute the money and it doesn't meet the guidelines, we're then responsible, not the applicant.
That's absolutely correct. And also that leads to some of the log jams that we see where it's difficult for the entity to gather some of the documentation that we are requiring. And so to those agencies, I say, I apologize, but we are doing our best to be in compliance and administer this as quickly as possible. So once we get all of the required documentation from an entity, the check, that time it takes to get to the check being sent out by the treasurer is about 12 to 21 days. And I think there's an average on here somewhere. It's more around 19 days.
So my last comment, Mr. Chair, if I could, and then I'm going to encourage us to move on, is.
You don't want to stay in the weeds.
Is I understand the idea that, if it cost us $300 or $3,000 to review a $250 check, it's outrageous. But yet we also have to keep in mind, like I said earlier, you got to look at the big picture. And you also have to look at that $250 check to that small agency is maybe more important than that $3,000 check to a larger agency. So we got to look at the big picture.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with you. Okay. Everything I think we covered in section 2 is good. So let's move on to section 3. Mr. Burke, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me try to adjust this. How was that on your end, Mr. Chairman?
That looks good. And just so everyone knows, if they didn't already, that an email has been sent out with this document, so you can pull it up on your personal device if you so choose.
Section 3 is a little more granularity into where the grantees and where we are in the processing of the grants. So again, it's broken up by the same categories and totaled in the box with a percent of total grant in the far right column of this particular section. And so the top line is grantees that have submitted expenses. Next line is those that have not. So you see the bifurcation of the 46 grantees, how many have and how many have not submitted expenses for consideration. The next section, the status based on total grants, is where they are in the review status. So it starts at expenses under review, and then moves all the way down until it's dispersed to the grantee. Please recall that a grantee can submit more than one packet for consideration. I think we said there's a maximum of 4 at this time being. So they could submit 1, they could submit 2, and this is just a unique count based on the grantee themselves. So again, you'll see that at a percentage total basis, there's 24% of the grants that have been dispersed so far on a count basis. Going down further in this section, it's a quantification on a dollar basis of the above counts. So it's the same type of information. The amount of submitted expenses, you'll see in total 1.145 million has been submitted. The average amount of submissions is roughly $25,000. The last 4 lines give you an insight into where those submissions are in the process. So 88,000 is under review, meaning it's with EY and with the program manager. 414,000 has been received, reviewed, and is in some sort of follow-up with the grantee. Normally, this is waiting for additional documentation or clarification on what their original submission contained. There's 245 pending distribution and 398,000 that's been distributed. I'll pause for any questions on section 3.
Any questions? Okay, you can proceed.
Section 4 is intended to give a summary snapshot of where the grantees are in submitting information for consideration. So there are 19 grantees, this is the top line. There are 19 grantees that have submitted expenses to justify 100% of their grant. And that 19 represents 41% of the total grantees. So it's 19 grantees over the 46 total. And they submitted, the number of pre-submission days is how long it's taken them to submit that since the onset of the expense reimbursement program. So this section is intended to give a snapshot as to how grantees are progressing through not only submitting information, but the amount of the submission as compared to their total grant amount. The bottom line on this, the bottom line, not the bottom line, 0% of the grant, there's 14 that have not submitted any information to us for consideration. Any questions on section 4?
Madam Chair?
Thank you. Just a quick reminder for me, please. All money has to be allocated by 25. These
End of
grant
24.
End of 24.
Yeah.
Gotcha. All right. So if those potential 14 grantees, if they choose not to submit for whatever reason, that money will come back to us. It will not be allocated to them since it's reimbursable. They may find that the work, effort, energy to submit is too complicated or what things may happen.
Well, we have allocated the total grant awards to these entities. Now we're just waiting for them to reimburse it. If they
understand.
don't reimburse it by the 2-year period that's outlined in our program, then they don't have an opportunity to finish that award off. So the ARPA allocation schedule is different than this program.
It's
already been allocated to specific entities with a specific amount.
So they have until the end of November 24, December,
31st.
Yeah, it would be March.
March of
24.
24.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, good.
Mr. Leonard?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think section 4 here, the remaining grant categories is very good. And I think it's important that people realize, even though there were 19 grantees, 14 haven't done anything yet, but this is a reimbursable grant. So until they expend the expense, they can't ask for reimbursement on it, and that's why they have 2 years. So these other 14 people that have not submitted anything yet may not have an adequate amount that they want to submit yet. So, you know, it could take a year, year and a half, but I think they all know they're getting the money, but they have to prove that they've spent it first. So that's why it's going to take time. We're only, what, 3-4 months into it now?
Yeah, and we made it retroactive back to March of 2021 to help these entities find expenses that they could reimburse. Ideally, they would have enough to reimburse right away, but maybe sometimes it's hard. The person who was going to handle the paperwork for them left, or, you know, moved on somewhere else, and now they need somebody else to do it. They don't have time. That's a one-person operation. There's various things that slow down the reimbursement process on the awardees end. But yeah, essentially, some of them will need more time to find those expenses, especially the big six, because theirs is a going forward type of reimbursement setup that we have with them.
And if I may, Mr. Brown, just to follow up, we will be sending them a letter to remind them as we get closer to the March deadline, at least 3 months before, probably at the end of that last year.
Yeah.
23, saying, you know, your grant is going to terminate. All receipts have to be in by no later than, let's say, February 1st, whatever it may be.
Yeah. All goes well, we won't have to send those because everyone will have gotten the reimbursement.
It's
So,
just in case.
yeah, Mr. Brown.
It's a very similar question that I had with the contact tracing that Madam Chair has brought up. So I guess my question would be, and maybe Gary could answer this, if for some reason they don't request this money, the money comes back into the pot.
Yep.
So I think if I can understand it right, by the end of 2024, the money has to be allocated, spent by the end of 2026, rough dates. If it comes back into the pot January 1 of 2025, we can't reallocate it to anything.
Well, these monies won't have that issue because they only have until March 24 to
March 24.
Yeah, to spend it. So we'll have 6 months or more than 6 months, probably 8 months to figure out what to do with that money, if any comes back from this program. But if it's something that happens after, I don't know exactly how that works for monies that aren't allocated.
That might be something to look at as we go down the road, is what happens to the money that doesn't get spent by or allocated by 2024.
And I'm positive
Or spent by
as we're approaching that year, we'll have a better sense of where we're at on funds and what is out there. Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brown, I think they have to submit by March 31st of 2024. So as Chairman Sanchez said, we will have a good 6 months to, after that point, if they haven't submitted, to decide, you know, if it goes back into the general fund for ARPA or whatever. But yeah, they have till March 31st of 2024.
So as slow as government works, I'm hoping that long before that deadline of when they have to submit by, our program manager will have a really good feeling whether or not they're going to be submitting. So we can start to make plans on what we're going to do with that money, so we don't end up with it sitting there and we can't do anything with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Phillips.
I would like to speak to that, mainly Madam Chair's mention of reminders. We do have a reminder schedule that we instituted, that we've sent a last reminder email to those that have not submitted expenses on August 8th. So our intention is 30 days after that for those that we have not heard from. And of those 19, I will tell you that we've talked to many of them. Our customer support, I think, is pretty high level. And so we do understand that a number of them are organizations, as Chairman Sanchez referred to, are small organizations. For instance, one individual that we assisted, Ernst & Young and I, on numerous occasions, was an organization who had lost their grant manager due to COVID, and their functionality was being covered by an employee who's actually a full-time teacher. So she was compiling all these documents herself for their expenses. We assisted them. But there are other organizations like that, that have maybe a retired person is running this program, so they're self-sufficient. It's a one-person shop. The number of those that we have not heard from is very small. And we are going to begin next week after the Labor Day weekend, which will coincide with about 30 days since the email reminder, initiate phone calls to those we have not heard from, just to ascertain, do they need help? Is there an issue? When do they project submitting their expenses? So we do have an understanding of where those 19 are in their process.
Any other questions? Okay, Mr. Burke, microphone is yours again.
Thank you very much. Move to section 5. And zoom out a little bit. Thank you. In section 5, this section is meant to track our internal processes to receive and really do the review process, from the review process all the way through payment to the grantee. So we're trying to account for the various steps in the review and payment process to determine one areas of improvement, but overall create metrics of the average days it's taking us to process an applicant's expenses. So in total, for the 4 months that we've been receiving and reviewing expense reimbursement submissions, there's been the same 1.145 million submitted. 400,000 has been dispersed. Days before submission signifies the days between when they first were able to submit an expense, which again is the late April date, and the date that they submitted it. So as we go to subsequent months, we'll see those dates continue to increase, because there'll be more time between the day they submitted and the April 27th date specifically. The average days column, there's 3 subcolumns. Review including TA's technical assistance, and that's specifically when we, EY or Peter, or a combination of the two, work with the grantee to help them understand what is an eligible expense, what documentation is required by the federal government, but otherwise helping them understand what we need in order to fully process and approve their expenses. So the review time in this particular column is a combination of EY and the program manager. So in May, we were at 29.5 working days. And then in August, we're down to 4.3. So we've been doing a number of things to take that down as slow as we can. I anticipate a question is that's not a full day where EY or the program manager is working. We may have looked at it for 15 minutes, realized we need some additional information, fired off the email to the grantee, and then it's sitting waiting for response to our request. So it's not that we were active for each hour of those 29.5 days in May. Similarly, county processing in May, 9.5 days. So this is meant to track the time between when the program manager agrees and approves the expense reimbursement packet. That packet makes its way through state's attorneys, county auditors, and finally to finance for all review, and then finance processes the payment. Submission to payment, that's the overall time it is taken on a day's basis between when we receive the submission from the grantee and when payment is made to the grantee. The final 2 columns are meant to capture the average number of encounters with a grantee in order to provide the technical assistance and obtain additional information, and the number of days between when we have the encounter and when we receive information back from that particular grantee. So in May, we had an average of 3 encounters per grantee to get the information we needed to approve their submissions. And in between those 3 encounters, there's roughly 9.8 days in between that added quite a bit of time to the overall 39-day submission to payment timeline. You can see that some of the speeds are increasing over time. That's very intentional. We've been working very closely, not only with the chairman, but with Mr. Phillips, to find ways to expedite the review, including producing a list of frequently asked questions so that we can provide proactive answers to questions that the grantees may have in the future to, again, minimize the amount of time that it takes for us to communicate with them and really drive down the number of days it takes them to respond to our questions. So I'll pause there for any questions on section 5.
Anyone have any questions? Yeah, I appreciate seeing the numbers getting lower each month for sure. Means we're getting them through the system more quickly. Okay, no questions. So Mr. Burke, does that complete your presentation?
There is one other sheet. So I'll scroll to that. And this is maybe quite small on the screen, and so I'll talk about it very quickly. This is a list of the grantees. It includes the status of their last submission. Again, they can include more than one submission, but this tracks their last submission. And then it has the different columns that correspond to some of the metrics that I described previously. You see in the far right column, their date of last contact. So as Mr. Phillips mentioned, an email blast went out through the submittal platform on August 8th, where many of those folks that needed a conversation or needed a prompt to submit expenses received one. You'll see sort of in the middle of the screen, the Elder Day Center, had an amount dispersed already, so they didn't need that follow-up email on August 8th because they were paid on July 5th. So this is meant to be a one-stop shop, if you will, to understand the current status of each grantee. So with that, Mr. Chairman, that's all I had to present to the committee.
Excellent, thank you. And I think the version that was sent to everybody does not contain this table, so I'll have this more updated spread sent out to everyone.
Or section 5 wasn't on there either.
Ah, okay, yeah. Yeah, we'll send this more updated version. I apologize. I thought I had pulled that correct one up, so my bad. All right, any other questions on this? I think this is very useful.
Mr. Chairman,
Ms. Bates, go ahead.
what do the blue lines mean? The blue highlights.
The blue highlights are highlighted lines such as Batavia Interfaith Food Pantry, Clothes Closet. It's meant to show gray, so sorry if it's coming through a different color, but that signifies where a grantee has submitted information or pending disbursement or dispersed that takes care of the entire grant amount.
Okay, good, thanks.
So over time, we hope to see all of these turn gray, which means there's no action left for them or us to do.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, hopefully this is a very useful tool for everyone. I know Ernst & Young put a lot of work into this to create something that gives you sort of a high level snapshot at the top and then gets down into some of the other details some people may be interested in about how this program is progressing. So thank you, Mr. Burke, for being here today and walking us through that. Okay, we've already covered the ARPA budget. Other committee matters, I have nothing, but I do recall, Mr. Tepe, at our last meeting, you had some questions about the time it took to put this program together. Were you able to follow up with the state's attorney's office and get sufficient answers to your questions?
My concern was not the time that it took to get the program together. My concern was the time it took to get people paid.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, so hopefully this is all helped.
And that was all just covered in this.
Yeah, excellent. Okay. All right, so we'll move on to new business. We have two resolutions. The first, I need a motion and a second for approving invoices from Ernst & Young LLP for professional services rendered from 1/1/2022 to 1/31/2022 and 2/1/2022 to 2/28/2022.
Bates moves.
Bates moves.
Brown seconds.
Brown seconds. So this is just refining our process for approving the invoices. So from now on, the invoices will go through this committee first. Some of them have gotten into the other finance track that gets put into the claims paid that you'll see on the finance agenda. But from now on, you'll see all invoices come through here. So that's all this is doing is approving these ones that you see before you. Any questions on this? Okay. Let's call the roll.
Bates, yes.
Brown,
Brown, yes.
Frost, Gums,
Gums, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Leonard,
Leonard, yes.
Martin,
Martin, yes.
Molina,
Molina, yes.
Strothman, and Tepe,
Deputy President.
and Sanchez.
Yes. Okay, it is approved. Next resolution, I need a motion and a second for authorizing the use of state and local fiscal recovery funds pursuant to the American Rescue Plan Act to fund the Fabulous Fox Water Trail Promotion and Infrastructure Project.
Brown moves.
Brown moves. Can I get a second for this one?
Martin seconds.
Martin seconds. So this is one of our department requests, as all of you are familiar with. This is coming from the Development Department. And the reason it is being brought to you at this time is because our Development Director, Mark Van Kerkhoff, identified a matching grant opportunity with the state of Illinois. And unfortunately, the deadline is later in September. So he needs approval from us to at least to show them that he has the authority to proceed with this project and apply for the matching grant. So if there are any questions, I unfortunately, Mr. Van Kerkhoff was not able to make it here today. He intended to be here. He has to attend to a family matter. So he had to step out for the day. And Karen Miller is also unavailable because she wasn't planning to be here and had a previous engagement. Mr. Martin?
I'm supportive of this. I'm going to ask the same question I asked before, so I know that we're consistent with what we've talked about. Was this one of the original $42 million
Yes.
programs that we approved?
Yes.
Okay, on that premise, I will support it.
Mr. Kenyon?
Before I vote, I'd like to hear an explanation where we're going to float this money up and down the river. I'm not sure it's at the top of my priority list.
Well, I can tell you that some of it has to do with marketing and promotional signage, informational signage along the Fox River. But there's a large component, which is these the kayak and canoe lockers, which can be placed alongside the shore, various municipalities, or even forest preserves. And that allows people who are coming to our area to travel along the river to know where they can stop off and safely secure their vessel. So they don't have to worry about going into Rosie O'Hare's in Dundee or something like that for a beer and a burger and then come back with no kayak. So assuming that's where one would be placed. But in any case, that is one of the larger components of this project, is installing those. So if you refer to the documents that were originally handed out, you can find on our SharePoint site as well. We can send those out to you again. There's more information that Mr. Van Kerkhoff supplied that shows what these could look like and more details of the plan. Mr. Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2 points. Number one, I take it that these allocations will qualify under the ARPA plan.
Yes, if we're presenting them to you in a resolution form, they have been vetted as eligible by our team.
Yeah, I really don't see the relevance of this with respect to the intent of the ARPA Act. However, where we are getting a dollar per dollar matching on it, I will vote to approve it, but and since it's in the departmental allocation of 42 million, we're not spending additional monies. Mr. Van Kerkhoff is just using part of his allocation for this, and he feels it's worthwhile, I would assume.
Yeah, and if you recall in the final rule that establishes the various high-level categories for expenditures, economic development, economic recovery is one of those. And that's what this what this project is dealing with, is helping with economic recovery. So the concept of the water trail is that it's federally designated. It's a tourist attraction for those who like to get out on the water. And it helps them to understand all the stops along the way where they can get off and get something to eat and thereby help stimulate the economy. So it's useful for local residents, but it's also for attracting those outside of Kane County to our area to spend money in our municipalities.
you know, I respect the position. I just don't agree with it. But I will vote to approve it.
Appreciate that. Madam Chair.
Thank you. My understanding is that one of the things coming out of economic development is during the height of COVID and even the downside of COVID, the travel tourism industry was greatly harmed. Hotels were not filled, restaurants were empty, and people were out of work because of that. Now, these are not very high-paying jobs, but they're critically important jobs, and they supply a lot of opportunities for many individuals to thrive and to be successful, and then perhaps, you know, have a career there or other things. So this is part of that effort. The other part of it is ecological and environmental. The more the Fox River is used, the more awareness will be of the importance of the Fox River. It is 220-mile passage on the Fox River, the trail itself encompassing 3 different counties. But because Kane County has the brunt of it, the largest length of it, we are going to be the leaders in this conversation and making this a national designated waterway. It goes beyond just that of being in the water via canoe, via kayak. It includes the bike trails, it includes walking paths, it includes birding, it includes a very robust fishing industry, which I don't know if any of you are anglers, if you like to fish, that is a multi-billion-dollar industry. All of that will be present during this Fox River Trail. So please, it's not just locking up a kayak. It extends beyond that. The signage will also include, as was alluded to, economic development. You'll stop, you'll be able to find out where a restaurant is, where an ice cream shop is, where a bike store is, et cetera, for our visitors to attend to that, as well as local residents. There'll be some festivals that'll be included on this, which will bring more economic development in. And what else? I missed something else that was important with what this opportunity is. Discussion of whether or not you feel dam removal, that'll be part of that conversation as well, to make sure we have a free flow, clean river. So that's where it begins. And having a national, the Rock River in Boone County, et cetera, is a national historic river. They have extended that out to not only just the river trail paddling. There is a wine tour. There is a flight tour, because there's a lot of independent airports in that area. And it's all part of this expanded river trail. So it'll be nothing but an asset to Kane County, not a detriment.
Mr. Tepe.
Tepe here. I don't want to put, I guess I'm going to put a damper on this. I just have a real challenge to see us allocating 1.2 million or more of these funds to tourism, when there's such a tremendous need for food, housing, and mental health resources in the county. And it just is a challenge to me why we can't do more in those areas rather than allocate this. And I understand that it's a tremendous opportunity to get matching funds. But this one just bothers me doing it out of ARPA funds, particularly with the other budget constraints that we've got. So I will not be supporting this particular item.
Mr. Chair.
Recall, we have gone through this laborious process of collecting all of this information from our in-house specialists and professionals. And it's taken a long time to get to the point where we are bringing these department projects to you. So you're asking, why aren't we doing something else? Why aren't we doing this, that, or the other thing? Well, we'll get to that. This is part of the process. If you want to do something with housing, let's get some ideas together. Let's put some plans together that we can bring forward to this committee to make happen. But otherwise, this is a result of a lot of the work that this committee authorized to happen. And the
Thank
review
you, Mr.
process
Chair,
that we
for
all
the
went through.
admonition, but that doesn't change my opinion that I just don't feel this, and I've been fairly consistent with that, so.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Tepe. Mr. Martin?
I think it's one of our tasks is to complete this process. And this all of these departmental requests have been reviewed by the board member teams that went to them, relevant committees. And we in fact have approved the list. And from my end, and I can tell you, if I review the list, there are things, that I'm not as excited about as others, but we need to have this, we need to complete this process. It has been reviewed and in my mind, perhaps oversimplistic, it's on the list. We approve it as long as it's been approved by our consultants and our state's attorney.
Mr. Chairman Bates, please.
Ms. Bates?
I think we can easily say that the Fox River is one of our most important natural resources. And as Madam Chair already said, this is not just an environmental or recreational effort. It has mostly to do with economic development and getting the restaurants and stores to have more customers. So, and it's been vetted. There's a lot of work has gone into this already. And I, for one, applaud the fact that there will be signs denoting where the porta potties are for kayakers. So I'm kind of joking there, but this is a very important addition to Kane County's economic and recreational development. So please consider this more than just a kayaker's recreational opportunity. It's going to help. Bringing people back into nature is something that brings them back to health and recovery too. So as far as an American Rescue Plan, I think rescuing our river and rescuing the people who want to use the river is a valuable and valid way to use this money. Thank you.
Mr.
Mr. Brown?
Yeah, I agree with almost everything that everybody said. But I want to touch base a little bit on the mental health, and I want to touch base a little bit on vision, because having the ability to get out during COVID greatly decreased the mental health issues that we may have had. So having the bike trails, the walking paths, the river, the nature, things like that, that people could get out and enjoy, I think was great. So now I'm going to address the vision a little bit, because it was about 30 years ago or so, I'm guessing, that the bike trails came to be. And that was through, I believe, Mr. Elstrom. And thank God for the vision that he and others along the way had to create the bike trails and the walking paths and the river frontage. So I'm looking at this as not only all the reasons everybody's talked about with economic development and tourism, but it's also a vision thing for looking for the future, for more opportunity for people to be able to do what they were able to do during this last COVID. Hopefully we'll never have to have that again, but it's just a good thing to have for today's mental health. People today just need to get out and enjoy nature and walk along. There's something about water, right? Something about water that's very relaxing. So I look at this as a mental health issue as well as economic development, tourism, and everything else that was talked about.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mr. Brown. That means it covers even more of the eligible uses under the ARPA.
Right.
Just economic
Mr. Chair.
Ms. Gums, and do you have something?
Thank you. Mr. Brown, I want to thank you for that conversation. I went back and forth on this in my brain until you just spoke. So thank you for that, because thank you for that, because it does ground us into the mental health aspect, because I'm not in love with it, but it does bring us back to that issue. So thank you.
Right, and I brought that up in my.
Thank you, Mavis. Yeah.
And if I could just
Madam Chair.
follow up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, Leonard was.
That's okay.
Thank you. I'll be very quick to Mr. Teppe's comments, and I'll parlay that with economic development. Having worked with the population that suffers from developmental disabilities, oftentimes there are low-level, entry-level jobs. And I don't mean low-level as far as they're methodical jobs, should I say, a routine. And these are perfect entry-level jobs for people who have developmental disabilities. In each one of our high schools, until you're age 21, you are trained on how to develop job skills. The tourism industry is a perfect vehicle for those people suffering from developmental disabilities to be a maid, vacuuming, doing laundry, And these jobs are there now to be able to provide those resources for those individuals, which will enable those individuals to have dignity in work.
Call the question.
No,
Mr. Leonard has a
I want to be
question
after
or a comment.
Leonard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I'd just like to mention that, Ms. Bates had suggested that we, give more money to the mental health aspect. I think Mr. Brown pointed this out. So, what we've done here is we've increased the amount from 4 million now to 5,200,000 and whatever thousand. And even though I don't know much about kayaking or canoeing, I do have a concern about just how many of our residents, our 530,000 residents, will be affected by this. I understand a little bit of the economic development, but I also realize that in our environment here, I don't think people are going to be kayaking 12 months a year. They may be kayaking 6 months a year.
It's like
So it is
golfing, but on the water.
I'm sorry.
It's like golfing, but on the water.
Yes. I agree. But we haven't used tax money for our golfing. Anyhow, my point is, the only reason why I'm going to support this is because of the matching funds. I don't agree with all the arguments, but I do agree with the mental health aspect of it. The economic, I think, will be minimally affected. But once again, when you're getting $1 for every dollar you give, I think it's worthwhile, and Mr. Van Kerkhoff is in support of this, so I'm supporting his suggestion.
Mr. Kenyon.
I feel the same way. The matching dollars is a big deal, but they've been doing this study for the Fox River for years before we even knew about COVID, trying to bring the industry up to it, cleaning up the river. Every time you drive across the bridge, you see people fishing. It brings them up and they're enjoying life. They wouldn't be able to do it if we didn't have a clean river. So I'll support it for that. And you're just stretching me. I'm pretty close to Mr. Tepe. We'd like to see more of a pigeonhole where it does something, but this is good enough.
All right. And last comment, anybody that's interested in learning more about kayaking on the Fox River, let me know.
I have a canoe that's sat in
Dundee.
the garage for 30 years.
Canoes are fun too.
Let's
Canoes are fun
go.
too. All right, clerk, please call the roll.
Bates,
Bates, yes.
Brown,
Brown, yes.
Froz, Gums,
Gums, yes.
Kenyon,
Yes.
Leonard,
Leonard, yes.
Martin,
Martin, yes.
Molina,
Molina, yes.
Strothman, Tepe,
Tepe, no.
and Sanchez.
Sanchez, yes.
Motion
Okay.
carried 8-1.
All right. Thank you all very much for the good discussion. Everything you bring up in these meetings helps us make the program better, helps improve our communications, and just only tightens up our game. So I really appreciate y'all interacting today. We have nothing for old business.
I do have an old business.
Oh, do you? Mr.
Chair,
Brown?
And I hate to drag this meeting out. I know Mr. Kenyon's gonna be
We
throwing
have
me
a
the
life
evil
outside the room.
arrows, but I'm curious, and forgive me if I missed something, but where are we at with the whole idea of the FEMA reimbursement on some of these things that we were talking about?
Yeah, we were trying to get a resolution to this agenda with the agreement and the resolution to bring on a vendor for those services. But we just weren't able to work it all together in time. So for our next meeting, that will be coming up. You guys will all get a copy of the agreement that we have and.
Okay.
Mhm.
That's good information to have. And the reason why I was thinking about this is sitting yesterday through the council meeting and budget and thinking about money. When we do get this vendor on and we do go through that process, there could be up to, I don't know, an undetermined amount of money, $2 million that we could be reimbursed from FEMA on expenses that have already been paid out.
Mhm. Yeah.
Before I introduce my motion, I think it was time well spent this morning in discussing it. And not always do we have that time well spent, Mr. Tepe. So I think we all learned a little something. I
Absolutely.
move that we adjourn.
Thank you,
Mr. Chairman,
everybody.
get
for a
on the
good
river.
meeting.
Is that a second, Ms. Bates?
Yeah, I 8 seconds.
All those in favor say